Welcome to the Green Building Show, where we investigate green design and building trends throughout Australia.
This deceptive little frontage in the suburb of Annandale in Sydney is the hero of this week's Best Renovation story. It hides a stunning interior, which is not only a lovely home, but also a showcase for its owner, who's an interior designer. But the build was fraught with difficulties, and it's an example of how trying to do the right thing can really turn around and bite you in the bum. Rebecca, tell me about the house that you bought 5 years ago and the house that you wanted it to become.
We bought a freestanding Federation house that had good bones at the beginning of the house and had a very dodgy old sort of renovated section at the back end. We built the house because it was on a beautiful section. It was on a deep block and it faced, well, it was next to a beautiful heritage church. We knew we had proportions and good bones to work with, and we also knew that it was a site that would lend itself nicely to creating something with quite a lovely aspect, and that was a bit of a retreat in the middle of the city. So our brief to the architect was it was quite a prescriptive brief, but we wanted to be faithful to the original architecture of the house and to be guided by that and by the heritage buildings around it. But we wanted it to be a bit of an evolution as you came through the house, for it to be quite seamless when you went from old to new, and for the renovation to be quite timeless and classic. We didn't want to pin it to any one style or fad, and I don't know that it could be pinned to that, but I guess I said to them that we wanted it to be quite earthy and tactile and quite seamless.
How did the architect cope with such firm ideas?
They were great. You know, we'd done a lot of thinking before we engaged them, and we had several conversations along the way. They did a great job at trying to fully understand what we meant by that, and we tried to create, supply good visual references for that too. They were very good at buying into the vision of what we had for the house, and together it was quite a collaborative project. And they also were very good in giving me a bit of leeway in going off and sourcing my own things, and I had quite set ideas about everything from palettes to finishes, and they were very open in letting me run with what I had in my head.
And those interior design ideas, of course, emanated from the fact that you have studied and have a business in interior design.
Yes, it was all quite complementary. I was finishing off my design studies when we first engaged our architect, so I was probably a bit of a painful client, but I was wary that I didn't want to be the know-it-all student. But it was a great learning process for me because I had fabulous people I could tap into around me, and I used that as a resource as we went. Everyone from my design school to people who I was studying with, and then the architect were great too at having those conversations.
And the architect had a very close relationship with the builder. How did that come about?
They did. So we had a fixed price contract, which I would recommend doing. We had 3 or 4 builders thrown into the mix to tender for us. 3 came from the architect, and I was adamant that we wanted to include our own builder in the mix, who had come recommended to us by contacts. And I was a bit dubious about using a builder who came recommended by the architect, if I'm honest, because I felt like that would shift the working dynamic a little bit, and now I think about it now, I was probably fearful that it would be a little bit of them against us throughout the process, but I was certainly proven wrong, and I would definitely not hesitate to recommend, if your architect has a builder who they have worked well with and they're suggesting that you run with that builder, then that probably is being recommended to you for a reason. And we found that it certainly worked in our interest. They had a fabulous working relationship. They had a proven formula. They'd had success on builds before, and it meant that we were on site and issues would arise, or we were workshopping design solutions for something. Instead of starting from scratch on everything, they could draw on their collective experience, and we could cut to the chase on everything. And it also meant that I didn't have to manage their relationship.
So far, it sounds like an absolutely dream build, but you know, you, like most people, your cost really blew out.
When we briefed the architect, we had a set budget and quite a prescriptive brief. And when that came back and the tenders came in, it was certainly came in at more than we had planned to pay for the build. But we worked with people, with the builders and with the architect in getting that back down to where we needed it to be.
How?
Several things. We basically put it back on them to say, this is what we thought we could do and this is what it's come back with. We need to have a transparent understanding, line by line, of where these costs are coming from. And when that was provided to us, we could all get around the table. I could better understand, you know, what elements of the build had crept up on us, what had been contributed by us, what were costs that were unseen and we hadn't factored in. We took the time to understand that. They were great at explaining, you know, what might be alternatives that we could look at. And then, you know, for instance, steel, for example, was a big cost
in this room.
Yeah, so I was trying to understand where is that cost coming from. And then, you know, when it's explained to you that to have a span of this size in an open plan space, you need X amount of steel to support that sort of a structure. So that starts the conversation of, well, what are the alternatives to steel? Could we have supports in place, for instance? Because I'll source some supports. And so then we, you know... As in, we've got these fabulous posts, and they've now become a design feature within the house. They were actually found by the architect and the builder, but they knew what I was after, and they were, by then, understood the look that we were going for. And this, which is one of the main design features that people comment on within the house, has actually saved us about $20,000.
But even so, that wasn't your big OMG moment, was it?
No. Look, we had relatively few surprises within the build, but the one that threw us a bit was we had DA approval to have knocked down and rebuilt a boundary wall between ourselves and our neighbours, and that was just to be a block and rendered wall. But on talking to our neighbours further, we realised that there was a section of the wall that had originally been there that they wanted to keep. It was a nice old brick section, and it had originally been part of an outhouse of sorts. So we said to them, look, we'll do what we can to preserve that, and we will build structures around it. And, you know, we sort of went outside, we advised council, went outside the process a little bit in doing it. We knew it was okay to do, but it was an exception. But unfortunately, when we got to the wall and it came time to dismantle the structures around the wall that it turned out were actually supporting it, it was revealed that there was no integrity in that wall itself. So it was a 3-metre high wall. It began to sort of cave over, and the engineer was called to site, and everyone was great in sort of how they addressed it and rallied around, but the upshot was that the wall couldn't stay. It wasn't a pleasant time for anyone, and in the end we had no choice but to replace it with what had originally been approved anyway. The result is fine. I think now that they're happy, time is actually a great healer, but I think the key learning on that one is it's fine to step outside the process, but beware that in doing it there may be repercussions. And had we had our time again, I think we just would have stuck with what had been approved and left it in council's hands to dictate what should and shouldn't be done.